Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Mirjana Pantic, and welcome to MCA 115 News Reporting. Today's lecture is going to be about news writing style and the language of news. So let me share my screen with you and start the slideshow. So remember that last time we basically discussed what journalism is about and what kind of duties do journalists have. So in this lecture, we are going to focus on journalism writing. How is journalism writing different from other forms of writing? So first of all, journalism is about writing on reality, on real events. So you can't make up anything. This is a type of writing that has no elements of fiction in it. Every information that you have in your story needs to be supported with facts. So let's take a look at this definition of journalism provided by Bender. Journalism is nonfiction storytelling to a large audience with varied interests, education levels, ethnicities, ages, genders, and other demographics. So think about this definition. It is important because if we are addressing people who are so diverse, we need to think about a couple of important things. We need to write in a way that everybody understands. So whether somebody is only high school educated or somebody has a PhD, we need to talk to them in a way that they understand. They understand us precisely. And we also need to make sure, as we're addressing different ethnicities, different age groups, and different genders, that we're covering topics that are important to them. So let's take a look at this example that illustrates a news story. So let's take a look at an example of journalism writing. This, because as I was like working on this lecture, it was the end of December and President Jimmy Carter just died. So I wanted to use this as an example of a news story. So how does a news story look like when somebody dies? So take a look at this headline, for instance. We talked about this in the previous lecture. So basically, every news story begins with the headline. So in this case, the headline is Jimmy Carter dies at 100. And then what is the first paragraph of the story? How do we call it? We call it the story lead. Yes, we learned about that in the previous lecture. So let's take a look at the lead of the story. Former President Jimmy Carter, a Georgia peanut farmer who vowed to restore morality and truth to politics after an era of White House scandal and who redefined post-presidential service, died Sunday at the age of 100. The Carter Center said the 39th president died in Plains, Georgia, surrounded by his family. Carter had been in home hospice care since February 2003 after a series of short hospital stays. So as you can look at this story, everything that we have is fact-based. So in the first paragraph of the story, they provided the most important information about this event. So President Jimmy Carter died at the age of 100. So it is really important to emphasize his age in the first paragraph of a story, even though like it's widely known, especially because he celebrated his 100. He celebrated his 100th birthday 2 months, I believe, before he died. So it is important to also emphasize this information in the lead of the story. And we also, everything else in the lead is based on facts, based on history. And the second sentence is also fact-based, the Carter Center. So that's the center that provided this information to journalists. So it's basically how do they know what they know? Attribute that information that you received to the source. So this is a source that they attributed the information to. So it really, like everything we see is fact-based and it's very straight to the point and clear, and it's clear to all of us, regardless of your education level, social status, and it's an important information. Regardless of who the president is, when a former president dies, journalists report on that. Now, how do we make a distinction between diverse forms of writing. Can you tell the difference between journalism and fiction writing, or journalistic writing and academic writing? How do you tell the difference? Let's take a look at another example. So, when I was in my 20s, I really liked reading Tony Parsons. He is a British author, and I just decided to kind of take a picture from one of the to take a screenshot from one of the books that he published. The book is called The Family Way. So I'm just going to read this to you, and we can think about this comparison between a fiction writing and journalism writing. Your parents ruined the first half of your life. Kat's mother told her when she was 11 years old, and your children ruined the second half. It was said with the smallest of smile, like one of those jokes that are not really a joke at all. Kat was an exceptionally bright child, and she wanted to examine this proposition. How exactly had she ruined her mother's life? But there was no time. Her mother was in a hurry to get out of there. The black cab was waiting. One of Kat's sister was crying, maybe even both of them. But that wasn't the concern of Kat's mother, because inside the waiting cab, there was a man who loved her and who no doubt made her feel good about herself, and who surely made her feel as thought there was an unruined life out there for her somewhere, probably beyond the door of his rented flat in St. John's Wood. So, what is the difference? Can you tell the difference between these forms of writing? What is like this major element that makes a division between the two? So this is all fiction. As you can see, this piece is very descriptive. It is very focused on emotions. It is also focused on the setting, dialogues, and so on. Can you see a report that would remind you of this? Well, maybe in some cases, when journalists write feature stories, they tend to be on the creative side. We'll talk about feature stories later this semester. So it's not common for journalists to be descriptive in their writing, but when it comes to those hard news stories, then what we focus on is simply providing facts. So you might see some descriptions when it comes to, let's say, when journalists report from President Carter's funeral, there will be a description of who showed up, how the funeral was carried out, and so on. But there is really a difference, and also in fiction writing, you will see many words that don't usually appear in a conversation with other people, in just a regular casual conversation with other people. And in journalism, what we want to do, we want to use the language that everybody can understand, that is very simple. Now, let's take a look at another example of writing, academic writing. So this is from my study about local news media that I published in 2021. So I'm just going to read it to you so we can compare this type of writing with fiction writing and with news writing. Local news outlets perform their operations in a complex digital media ecosystem that pressures them to acclimatize to market demands and introduce strategies to attract readers and advertisers. With the limited amount of resources in a highly competitive market, they have been experimenting with diverse game plans to bring traffic to their websites. That includes an aspiration to stand out in an overcrowded market and deliver content that makes them noticeably distinctive. So, what is the thing with this writing? Do you think that somebody who is not in the field would be able to understand it? Or even if you read it, can you understand it right away, or you kind of need to focus more than when somebody says, oh, temperature tomorrow is going to be 72 Fahrenheit. So just think about it. Think about the simplicity and complexity. Like in this case, we have a more complex vocabulary. So words such as complex, acclimatize. Let's see, what else do we have here? Experimenting with diverse game plans. That's not something that you would use in the media, but basically the whole point, aspiration, overcrowded market, or overcrowded market, you actually could use in journalism, but aspiration, I'm not so sure. Noticeably distinctive, I'm not so sure. These are the words that you would be using in journalism. And this story is about, if we translate it into, let's say, like a news story, we can say, according to this study, local news media are looking for different ways to survive in today's market. So it's literally, you can start and finish with that, and then you can explain that they have a very small amount of resources they can rely on to cover their operations. So they need to provide to their citizens original content so they can compete with other news organizations in the market. So there are like a bit more simple way to say this, but again, this was written for an academic community. This article was published in a journal, so we simply use a more sophisticated and complex language. It doesn't need to be something that is very hard to understand, but definitely for those people who are not in the field and who are not well educated, it could be very difficult to understand this type of writing, even though I still feel it's simple because probably because I wrote it, but it can still be very complex for them to understand. So if we compare academic writing with journalism writing, they have one thing in common. And what is it that they have in common? So this is one of the questions that I'm going to ask, because for the exercise that you are due to complete before we meet in person, I'm going to ask several questions, and all these questions are going to be related to the lecture that I'm now delivering. So my question would be, what is the difference between academic and journalism writing? So one of the things that we see here is complexity. So definitely we use more simple words in journalism writing in comparison to academic writing, but what is it that makes them similar? Both academic and journalism writing need to rely on facts. So that is what is common for them, but also different, what makes them different in comparison to fiction writing. How does good writing look like? What do we need to do? I'll give you some examples of this, what I'm talking about later. But let's say you need to use standard word order when writing a sentence. That means subject, verb, a direct object. Use simple words so ordinary people can understand your writing, unless you're writing for a specialized magazine on, let's say, social media or IT or a similar field. So you're writing in a way when you are expected your readers, your audience to understand your writing, because your magazine specializes in a specific field. So the readers who are going to read your magazine are expected to have the knowledge of the field, but that still means that you're not supposed to overwhelm them with too many technological words. You still need to write in a simple way. And even like this, when you mention, let's say you talk about an iPhone 16 Pro, and then you want to explain like certain differences between the previous versions, you just say, oh, this is the camera and blah, blah, it has this and that. You kind of describe characteristics, but you can also explain in a plain language how much better is that camera in comparison to the previous one. So these are the things that also make journalism writing different from other forms of writing. Combine short and long sentences. The reason for this is, if you just read short sentences, your writing can be boring. If you just have long sentences all the time, it's also going to be boring, because people want some dynamics in your writing. So that means provide long and short sentences, combine them, make your writing style livelier. Be concise. Use a few words to explain your point. Emphasize what is the most important in the story and report those facts in a straightforward manner. Don't go around the bush. Just tell us what happened. Remember, you're supposed to answer those 6 questions: who, what, when, why, where, and how. And avoid unfamiliar words. If you go back to my piece, my academic piece, and if you look at some words that you're not familiar with, then if you're going to use that in your writing, and if you don't understand them, then how is your reader going to understand that? So you need to keep that in mind when you're working on a story. Now, how do we simplify words and sentences? So these are the things that we're going to work on in class with specific examples. But you, as I mentioned, your audience needs to understand what is it that you're writing about. And there are some examples I remember when I worked with young journalists, and they, some of them would come from a press conference and say how they didn't really understand certain things that a speaker mentioned at the conference, but then they still use their quote in a news story. So don't do that, even if it's a quote, even like if you feel like, oh, this is important, I need to mention this in the story. So I'm just going to quote them directly and get away with it, but I don't understand what they really had to say. Don't do that. Like simply ask them at the press conference to clarify it, or ask somebody else in your newsroom to help you if you don't understand the sentence that you want to use in your story. But just keep in mind, if you don't understand your own writing, if you don't understand what you're writing, what you're reporting about, how is your audience going to understand it? So it's really important that you go over what your report and to make sure that everything is clear before you publish. Listeners, readers, and viewers should not be confused. So, if I'm watching the news and I can't rewind, I'm gonna be concerned. I'm gonna be upset because I didn't understand like something that I felt was really important. So you don't want to upset your readers or viewers, especially when it comes to your viewers. So especially when you write for television, you want to make sure that your sentences are short, that people can follow what you're saying. Complicated phrases tend to obscure facts. So if you just add complexity to it, and people get so confused that they cannot see all these facts in your story. Use short sentences and simple words and focus on one idea within a sentence or a paragraph. If we go back to that Jimmy Carter story, so there was the first paragraph, it was one sentence that informed us that he died. In the second sentence, we learned about, or in the third sentence, we learned about his time, the time that he spent in hospice, and so on. So it's kind of every paragraph is supposed to introduce a new idea. Now, let's take a look at some other things that are important for good writing. So good writers need to know the language. What does it really mean? So they need to know the rules of grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Now, this is also important. As I mentioned, that you need to have like both long and short sentences in your story. You need to distinguish between simple sentences that include a subject, a verb, and an object. One such example is she enjoys reading. He loves swimming. So it's very simple. Or she is reading a book. So she is reading a book. So there's a subject, a verb, and an object. The subject is she, and the verb is reading, and the object is a book. Then there are compound sentences. They have more than one subject. And an example of such sentence is she enjoys reading, but she also loves drawing. And then complex sentences that contain of an independent clause and at least one dependent clause. One such example is, although she was exhausted from a long day at work, she stayed up late reading the novel because she couldn't wait to find out how it ended. So just remember that these three types of sentences are important, and to make our writing lively and good and engaging, we need to combine them. Simple, compound, and complex sentences. Now, what other things are important that will immensely improve our writing? Try to use active rather than passive voice, as it is more direct and livelier. Active voice, one such example is the chef prepared a delicious meal. And then let's see how it looks like when we use passive voice to say the same thing. A delicious meal was prepared by the chef. So you see the difference, like just saying the chef prepared a delicious meal sounds livelier and better than a delicious meal was prepared by the chef. And then there is another example. We can say she threw a ball, or a ball was thrown by her. So you see the difference. It's basically much better um, to use active than passive voice when writing sentences for your news reports. Another important thing is avoiding cliches. Why do you need to avoid this? Because we heard them so many times. It's a little annoying. So why do we need to have them in sentences? It's unnecessary. Some examples of cliches include burning issues of the day, giving up without a fight, everything happens for a reason. I want to mention a cliche that your professor cannot stand. That is first and foremost. So when I see that, I really get upset because I don't understand why people use that in writing. So, having that in mind, one of my questions for this week will be, what is your professor's pet peeve in terms of writing? What is the cliche that she just cannot stand seeing? And when I look at your answer to my question, I will know exactly that you found the time to watch this video lecture. And I also want you to memorize this, because I will probably ask you the same question later this semester. Now, let's take a look at which sentences sound better. Which sentences sounds better? Um, Designing a home. Now, let's take a look at which sentence sounds better. Designing a new homepage for the website was a task undertaken by a visual journalist. A journalist designed a homepage for the website. Which one is better? What do you think? The second one is definitely better because it represents what? It represents active voice. So that's why we're going to use it instead of the first one. What other things in writing we need to avoid by all means? Repetitive phrases, such as past experience. If it is experience, it means that it happened in the past. Free of charge, it is simply free. Hurry up, it is sufficient to say hurry. Brand new, we can just say new. Split apart, split is sufficient. So there's no reason to repeat these words. Reason why, we can just say why. Exactly identical, we can just say identical. So think about this, and we'll practice in class, like how to deal with these things. How do we remove unnecessary words? So this is just one example. The architect made an assessment of damages of 30 million or more related to the attack on the US Capitol. So let's take a look at the sentence. So how do we remove unnecessary words? How do we rewrite sentences? Made an assessment of damages of. He just assessed. So we need to be as concise as possible. There is no need for all these words. We can say the same thing using fewer words. So let's take a look at the example number 3. You can see all other examples on my screen. So an estimated 15 million to 26, it's about 20 million, because we don't know if it's 15, 26, so it's definitely best to say just about 20 million people have participated in various George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests. So if we said that these were protests, so of course it wasn't one, it was multiple. So, and multiple various, that's basically a synonym. That's why we can remove this word. At the present time, he's planning. He plans instead of that to leave for the state of New York, to leave for New York. If we want to distinguish between New York and New York City, we're just going to say New York City instead. If we say New York, it is the only state in the country. So why would we say instead the state of New York? It's not necessary. We can just say to leave for New York at 3 p.m. So p.m. refers to the afternoon. So we're not going to use in the afternoon next Thursday. Now, another very important thing about writing is how we deal with paragraphs. And what are paragraphs? This is really important. So I want you to listen to me carefully. The sentences that form paragraphs should also flow together. You need to start a new paragraph with each shift in topic. So don't put all the sentences in one paragraph, but as you're changing, like your idea is you're shifting to another idea, then just start a new paragraph. Paragraphs in news stories often are one sentence because that is enough to illustrate a point. And if we go back to that Jimmy Carter story, you remember how every sentence was basically one paragraph. Avoid having paragraphs that contain more than 3 sentences. This is also important. You know how in academic writing we use APA style, while in journalism writing we use AP style. So according to APA style, if we are using that style when we're writing academic papers, our paragraphs need to have a minimum of 3 sentences. But when it comes to journalism writing, it is usually the maximum that you should have. So 1 up to 2 sentences is quite enough. Like don't go beyond 3 sentences if you really don't have to. So keep this in mind. This is a difference between journalism and academic writing. So in journalism, we use APA style. In journalism, we use AP style, while in academia, we use APA style. When writing scholarly paper, we also use Chicago, but in journalism writing, it's AP style, Associated Press style. Another important thing about paragraphs is that ideas that are related to related or belong together should not be separated just to create shorter paragraphs. And that is all I had to say about writing, because this lecture is actually is very practical. So we're going to spend time in class with dealing with a lot of different examples where we will be removing words and rewriting sentences and so on. But let me reflect on a couple of important things in this lecture. What is the first thing that you have in mind? Like the stories that you write are meant to be delivered to a large audience. Also, the stories that you're reporting on, for if you are a TV reporter or a radio reporter, you also work and you deliver your story to a large audience. So you need to make sure that everything you write is very simple and understandable, so your audience can understand you, your wide audience can understand you. This type of writing, journalism writing, is definitely different from fiction and academic writing. When we compare it to fiction writing, there is no fiction because journalism is a nonfiction type of writing. So we can't make up events. We need to focus on facts. And when we compare it to academic writing, we don't use the complex words that academic writing is using. We rely on simple words. We also want to make sure that our writing is concise and clear, that it leaves no doubt about the meaning. Use simple words and avoid unfamiliar words. Make sure to combine short and long sentences because that makes your story and makes your style livelier. Use simple words, use active voice instead of passive voice, and avoid cliches, especially first and foremost. And write short paragraphs. So try to focus on 1 to 2 sentences, per paragraph, 3 sentences max, but try not to go beyond this. And this is all I had for you for today. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day. I will see you soon. Bye bye.